Hello, my name's David.
And I'm Russell.
And this is Old News.
It's good to be back.
Although it's only about an hour since we finished the last episode.
Yes, because this is our first time that we're recording in advance.
Yes.
So 2 episodes once.
Back to back.
Back to back. But this is because I'm going to be absent for a number of weeks. I'm having a trip away to Canada, which would be nice. But of course the downside of that is I have to do a bit of a longer stinted work to compensate for the time I'm going to have off. Hopefully we can get these out in some sort of order.
I should be able to time this perfectly and get them. One thing we've never really established is like what day or what time of day we should release the shows on. I just do it when I do it.
Presumably there's probably a good time, like from a marketing point of view. I don't know what that is. We've generally sort of issued sort of quite early hours of the morning.
Because I generally get it finished very late at night and then just bang it up there. There was one time I scheduled it to come out, so I finished it sort of 12:30 in the morning, something like that. And I scheduled it, I set it all up so it would come out at about 6 o'clock in the morning, UK time.
UK time. I mean, should we be aiming for the East Coast of America, or?
Well, I don't know, if we do it UK time, we get a hit from UK listeners.
Yeah,
and then we get a second bite of the cherry when America comes online.
Yeah, the East Coast and then the West Coast a few hours later.
OLDNEWS, Old News.
So we wanted to make an appeal to our listeners, didn't we?
Yes, I came up with an idea. Well, I came up with this idea quite a long time ago, but I wanted to give things a bit of time to bed in. So, you know how we have our links where Pete has recorded a number of silly ways of saying old news? I was thinking we could open that up to the public. We'll still keep using Pete's links, but I thought it would be fun to get our listeners to record just the words old news
in whatever
way they fancy. It can be silly, it can just be in your voice, it can be in a foreign language.
Well, that'd be interesting.
Yeah.
That might make us hostages to fortune.
Yeah, well, we might have to run it through Google Translate just to just to completely mess everything up, really.
Very, very rude.
Yeah. You can record it in any format you like. You don't have to have a proper, microphone on your computer. Just do it on your phone, on voice recorder.
Yeah. Well, that'd be exact.
You know what? You could even put it on a cassette and post it in. I have the technology to do that. But yeah, at any form of electronic recording, I can use any file type and convert it. So there you go. Just the words old news.
Old news.
Old News.
If you would like to contact us here at Old News, there are, of course, the usual methods. You can find us on the old-fashioned interwebs at oldnews.podbean.com. You can email us on oldnewspod@gmail.com. We are available on Facebook. Just search for Old News Podcast, and we're also available on Twitter at Old News Pod. And if you can find us on YouTube, then well done.
Well, another thing I've been thinking about for a long time.
Right.
This has been on my mind. I wish it was more on my head. I've been wanting a podcasting hat.
A podcasting hat?
A hat to wear while I podcast.
What? This makes no sense. Is it not a visual medium?
I know. But I just feel... You know how you have your smoking jackets and... Well, we don't, because we don't smoke, but...
We don't smoke, yes, that's true. I know somebody who does smoke a pipe and actually has a smoking jacket. I do know a bloke who has that. So what type of hat would you...
Well, I've always wanted a fez. I think a fez would be a great podcasting hat.
I do know a chap who I don't know whether he still does, but he certainly used to wear a fez, unironically. He was actually an American bloke.
Right.
But he studied at the... trying to remember, it's called now SOAS, the School of Oriental and African Studies, which is part of University of London. He used to wear a fez.
Just about town.
Yes, just because. But I don't know. It's like it's particularly sort of. It's a certain ethnicity sort of hat, isn't it? And is it not a bit culturally appropriative to?
No, I don't. It's only cultural appropriation if you're pretending to be
that thing.
And I wouldn't be. I would just be wearing it as
maybe. You'd be wearing it in a Tommy Cooper-esque
kind of
style. Yeah. You're just jealous because I'm sat here with a sombrero on.
Yeah. You have your podcasting hat.
That's, yeah. You see, this is the beauty of the audio format. We can just make any absurd visual claims we wish.
Yeah. I mean, I've got my sock puppet on.
So you're making supportive comments about Trump policies.
Old news.
Of course, with this being the second recording of the night, and I have to drive my car, there's no beer of indeterminate strength.
No.
So you have a cup of tea.
Yeah, which I'm actually making.
This is a cup of decaf tea.
Yes, it's decaf tea.
Decaf tea.
With skimmed milk.
It's just
so it's almost, but not quite, entirely unlike tea.
Unlike tea, yeah. And I've got Ribena, or shop equivalent thereof.
Supermarket own brand. the supermarket in question is mainly orange, but we won't mention.
Oh, right. And that weird sort of colour system that we've adopted for supermarkets in the UK is not unlike political parties.
Yes. This is very civilised. I've got my own little milk jug.
You are kidding me.
Yeah.
See, milk jugs, I was just musing on this in a cafe yesterday, actually, where it was provided with a separate milk jug. All this does is create washing up.
Yes, but the alternative would be to have the big litre, actually 2 litre thing of milk in here getting warm while we do the podcast.
Oh, you could have just made the cup of tea in the kitchen, right?
But I wouldn't have been able to get in here as fast.
Oh, right, okay.
It's had a correct amount of time to brew.
And next time you're going to have a podcasting tea caddy and...
We'll have the tea... Oh, I should have brought my tea.
And pot.
Teapot?
Teapot.
I had loose tea for the first time when I was on holiday.
For the first time?
I have, to my knowledge, I cannot remember having loose tea before.
Right, okay.
Until I was on holiday in Devon, and in one of the places I had one of my many cream teas. I had loose tea with the proper, little sort of sieve type thing to hold the tea going into the cup.
Tea strainer.
Yes.
Yeah. So in Devon, they put cream on then the jam, right?
Every single one I had, you were expected to construct it yourself.
Yeah, well, that's just it, isn't it? And we all know that the Cornish are correct on this issue. It's jam first, then cream.
Yeah.
Yeah. No contest. Sorry that Devon. Wrong. Just wrong. I've just entered into a holy war there, haven't I? So, meanwhile,
we've already called it scone, and that's upset half the country.
Meanwhile, in Israel, Palestine,
the scone enders.
Yeah. Oh dear.
Old news.
So this week's subject is a rather serious one.
It is a serious one, and is one of the problems of discussing news stories is we do tend to deal with a bit of death and destruction from time to time, and this is topic tonight is the Boxing Day tsunami. Now that be how we remember it, because an awful lot of people don't have a clue what Boxing Day is.
No.
So generally, I found it tends to be called the Indian Ocean tsunami of 2004.
Yeah, the 2004 Indian Ocean earthquake and tsunami.
And tsunami. Having sort of looked around a little bit, this is a very well-worn path in terms of some of the... There's a lot of the news organisations have done...
retrospectives, like 10-year anniversary and that sort of thing.
Yeah, they did documentaries sort of right at the time, and then... sort of, the 10th anniversary and so on, as you say. But you looked a little bit at the actual incident itself, and did you have anything about the casualty figures?
Yes, so it affected 14 countries. Indonesia, because the earthquake happened close to Indonesia, it happened off the west coast of Sumatra.
It was about 100 miles off the coast, wasn't it?
Yeah. So Indonesia, Sri Lanka, India and Thailand were the worst affected countries. Okay. It's interesting that Sri Lanka, which is on the opposite side of the Indian Ocean,
right,
was one of the worst countries affected. and between 230,000 and 280,000 people lost their lives.
It's just an astonishing amount of people.
It makes it one of the worst natural disasters of all time.
Right, it's kind of one single incident.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, I wonder that's sort of in recorded history.
Well, it will be, yeah.
But then again, I suppose at no point in the past have we had the levels of urbanisation and...
Yeah. There was an earthquake in China hundreds and hundreds of years ago that supposedly killed something like 800,000 people.
Right.
But it was so long ago, you can't really be sure how accurate the records were.
The historical record is.
Although, to be fair, the Chinese were pretty good at keeping records.
Yeah. But isn't there some point after that where the Chinese emperor declared that any history beyond a certain point was to be destroyed?
Right.
Isn't there a big gap in the Chinese historical record because there was a load of documentation when it was all just burnt?
Oh, I don't know.
I'll have to look that up, but there's something about that. Yeah, so it is just astonishing. It was interesting looking at how the Western media reported this, with the sort of the perspective that we have. One of the things I noticed actually during the incident, sort of the day and the day of the incident, and as it sort of progressed over the next few weeks, was that it was definitely one of the first disasters where there was a lot of video provided from camera phones.
Right, yeah.
And obviously there was people with video cameras, the sort of the more old-fashioned video cameras as well. But in that is kind of that footage all came from a certain segment of society, because so many of the victims in Thailand, particularly Thailand, were tourists.
Mm.
There seems to be this real sort of imbalance to me, that so much of the footage that we have, or that we see in the West, that I could find with English language commentary attached, was from white Europeans, or white Americans, and obviously because it's quite a exotic place, it's an expensive place to go on holiday. It's sort of it's a white middle class segment, and I wonder how much this colours our view of this. To me, the voices of the thousands upon thousands of local victims in those countries aren't really heard in this. The way it, so much of the documentary stuff that I watched, it was an anniversary documentary that Sky News did, and that was very good. In fairness to Sky News, they were one of the first people sort of on the ground to report from the incident, but almost all of the story that they told was from the point of view of British victims, with only 2 people from Thailand talking.
I think, having spent some time looking at it on the internet, what seems to be out there now, if you were just to do a Google search for the 2004 Indian Ocean earthquake or tsunami, most of the information you find is about locals. You're right about the pictures and so on being a lot of white tourists running away from waves and things, but a lot of the information is about the people of the countries that were affected, I think.
Yeah, I suppose when you're looking at reconstruction, it tends to be about the economic data of reconstruction, and I
think you're right. The news media will tend to talk about how it has affected people from their own countries and neighbouring countries. One interesting little fact I found was that particularly Germany and Sweden were badly affected in terms of numbers of deaths.
Oh, really?
It was actually the most Swedish people who've died in one go since some battle in the 1700s.
Crumbs.
Because obviously Sweden, being neutral, hasn't been involved in any other wars.
Right, and
very stable geologically country.
Being a small country as well, this must have been a major incident.
It actually caused political ructions in Sweden because they were seen as not doing enough to help.
Right. And I imagine the diplomatic missions of Sweden being relatively modest, being a small country, and then being overwhelmed. Yeah,
so you can imagine Sweden talking about their however many hundreds of people died.
So that will be their focus.
And that will be their focus. Yeah. And sort of missing the hundreds of thousands of people from, Sri Lanka and so on who've died. Can you stop that happening? No, I don't think you can.
I think it's natural, I guess. But I think, as you say, the follow-up, when there is all kinds of reports done and census taken and so on of the countries as they recovered, that they are naturally a little bit more boring and don't get the same press because it's no longer as immediate.
No.
But you think about the enormous numbers of people. There are towns and villages and cities there where they lost so many people that they ceased to exist, really.
Yeah.
Or maybe those communities are still there, but they have changed in character permanently because the populations are rather greatly reduced, or new people have to move in and it becomes a different place. I think there is one of the bits of video footage which is quite common on YouTube, which is taken by some locals, and I think it's in Thailand, and in the background they're talking and the subtitles provided, and they're looking at the beach, and you can sort of see one of the first signs of a tsunami is the water goes out.
Yes. Yeah.
And they're saying the local people are running because they understand what's happening.
Right.
And the tourists are stood watching
and looking. Yeah.
Yeah. And what struck me was there's a very famous account of the eruption of Vesuvius by, is it Pliny the Younger? So, I mean, this is back in AD 79, isn't it, I think? And they talk about the same things there. Because when the eruption happens, it's preceded by a big earthquake. And the water goes out of the harbour.
Right.
And all the townsfolk go down to look. Why are the boats sitting on the sand? This makes no sense. Then the water comes rushing back, and a whole load of people are killed in the period just before the eruption that destroys Pompeii and Herculaneum. And it's interesting that so many these events are so infrequent that so many people still don't understand what to do.
Yeah.
They still don't know what it means. I imagine if I saw the water had disappeared over the horizon, I would run because I know.
Because you know now, because you've been looking at it, and
because I was told that story at school when I was in the Latin class.
Well, there's an interesting thing. There was on one of the beaches in Thailand, there was a young British girl from Scotland, I think, who had just been learning about tsunamis at school.
Right.
She saw that happen, and she told her mum and dad. And the mum and dad went round the beach and got everybody off the beach in time. So that one girl who'd luckily done something in a geography class saved however many hundreds of people were on that beach at the time.
That was interesting to contrast what happens here with the response of Japan in the more recent tsunami there with the Fukushima disaster. But think about it, though, that no sooner did the earthquake happen that there's all kinds of alarms and public safety systems. They just kick into action straight away in Japan. I mean, obviously it's one of the most developed countries in the world.
Yeah.
And and that was an appalling disaster, and thousands of people were killed. But it's a fraction for an incident of somewhat similar magnitude. Hopefully, I mean, there has been investment in education and sort of prep since.
We'll be coming to the warning system that's now in place. Did you look at their website?
I didn't know.
Just literally before we came in, that was the last thing I was writing down. On their website, there's a "What should I know" section.
Okay.
It's in English, I assume. There's ones for different languages for all the different countries that it's for, but they have one of those sort of things where there's like 3 or 4 words you've got to remember. So they've got feel, see, hear, run.
Okay.
So you feel the earthquake, you see the water going out like you've just mentioned.
Okay.
You hear the roar of the tsunami coming towards you. You run for safety.
Right.
And then you call your warning organisation, your warning centre, and
that's really well thought out, isn't it? Very simple survival advice. Again, we've talked about this in the previous podcast, but how lucky we are in the UK to be somewhere that is so generally geologically stable.
Yeah,
we might occasionally have a tremor that topples a chimney pot or something off someone's roof.
That felt like a large truck driving past my house.
Yeah, there was a loud bang and I thought it was a car backfiring. Yeah. We are so blessed to be in such an area.
Old news!
One of the things that I thought was worth looking at, because you mentioned the detection, the only real detection system we had, like at the time of the incident was the American-based one, but that was all in the Pacific.
Yeah, for the Ring of Fire.
Yeah, so that is the
US Pacific Tsunami Warning Center.
Yes, that's right. And it's operated by the NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. They started in 1946 after an earthquake and a tsunami up in Alaska that killed sort of 160 odd people. And so they're based in sort of Hawaii and have a second center in Alaska. But I was just reading on their site how their system was greatly extended in 2005 in light of the incident, and presumably their extended network for detection in the Pacific probably joins up now with the new network that is now operated in the Indian Ocean. Hopefully this will save lives. I guess one of the big things that has changed now is that all those countries, people have mobile phones.
Yes. Well, one of the ways the governments disseminate the information once they know something's happening is through text messages.
Right.
So there's all the usual ways of, put it on the telly, put it on the radio, loudspeakers, mosque, the speakers in mosques,
right,
police cars with loudspeakers, sirens.
Yeah.
But text message is going to be the main way.
That's got to be the quick and simple way if everybody's phone just suddenly beeps all at once.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that I took away from the Sky News documentary I was watching was just the sheer level of trauma. And people talk about post-traumatic stress disorder, and there was a lot of people there suffering from survivor guilt.
Right.
It's very common, where people think, well, why did I die when...
why
did I survive
when other people died?
Other people died, the other person... And there was one lady who was saying that she was sort of sucked under the water and somebody pulled her out, and then they got caught up in a second current.
Right.
And when the water subsided, the person who'd saved her the first time had died.
Oh dear, right, yeah.
And of course she has this terrible conflict in her mind about why did that person who saved me die, and I was the one who survived. And that's the thing, like, she was suffering terribly, and there was another lady who was a businesswoman in Thailand, a Thai citizen. She had ended up sort of coordinating volunteers to help with the immediate sort of medical treatment, first aid, and sort of triage of folk. And she had no medical training at all, but because she was just like a natural leader, she'd ended up sort of getting involved in this, and she had ended up having to make terrible decisions well beyond her competence, essential, but she was the only person on the ground to do it, and she had suffered terribly from PTSD. I think there's just two individual stories, and in microcosm, you get whole populations suffering that.
Yeah.
It just must be a terrible, terrible cost, the amount of people that must suffer from that all the time. And imagine that the vast majority of people in those countries probably don't get much access to mental health services. The more I think about it, the more it generally appalls me.
Yeah.
Like the ongoing cost of this that I imagine to this day, and also with people who are orphaned. Or people who became widows or whatever, so their families are greatly damaged, and can't provide for themselves and so on. Yeah.
Old news.
In the rush to give money, the immediate humanitarian aid, I just wondered, I couldn't really find much to sort of say how much of that money was then held back to spend on the long-term recovery, on that kind of thing.
To be fair, there seems to have been a lot of money spent on the reconstruction. Billions and billions.
Yeah, there has been. I mean, there's been criticism from some quarters. I've got a little bit here which I wanted to talk about, because there was a report written for the UN, and it was written by a group of 3 NGOs, non-governmental organisations: ActionAid, the People's Movement for Human Rights Education, and Habitat International. They looked into sort of the impact on human rights, and some of these countries really haven't performed terribly well. There are criticisms to be had with the government. So in Sri Lanka, compensation payments only paid to men, which immediately excludes widows, and possibly widows with children, and also single women.
Right.
and single parents. So that's just terrible. And there's all kinds of delays for those people getting any sort of compensatory payments, when they've had their livelihoods taken away. And also there's a real sort of trend in India of land grabs.
Right.
Because you've got coastal land. Well, like at one time, historically, coastal land's quite marginal. It's literally on the margins, right? It's land where poor people live.
Yeah.
Of course, now coastal land is
Tourist land.
ripe for development. So you end up with communities that have been literally washed away, and then commercial interests come in and grab the land. You go, well, it's ours now. We're building a hotel. Or the other thing is where populations were evacuated, like in the name of safety, or we're creating a buffer zone, so we're moving your village 2 miles inland.
Okay, yeah.
And now the coastal land gets
Developed.
grabbed. Yeah.
Right.
And that's obviously really depressing, to hear that sort of going on. And so you got this sort of conflict of commercial interests and government complicity.
Mm-hmm.
And you think, well, who in the government is getting the benefit of this sort of economic development? But now, of course, the commercial interests would argue that we're coming in and redeveloping the place after a major disaster, providing jobs, providing economic development. There's maybe some truth to that.
Yeah.
But you can just imagine the types of people that get pushed out. So this report goes on to sort of talk about some of the groups that get excluded or are badly served in the aftermath, particularly women, constructing housing that is insecure for women, putting women and children at risk of sexual exploitation. You've got farm labourers and landless people are pushed to the margins and aren't really sort of cared for particularly well. And Dalits, or the like formerly untouchable castes.
Yeah.
In India, they will pay compensation to everybody else, but not to you because you're untouchable.
Yeah.
So the wealthy people,
that's crazy.
right? The wealthy people get the compensation, the charitable help, but the poor people don't. There's a class of people who I've not heard of before. I'll get the pronunciation wrong. The Mokems or Mokems, who are like they're described as being sea gypsies. They're in Thailand. And they're essentially a transitory people that make their living going up and down the coast. They don't live in any fixed place.
No,
they have like small scale fishing that sort of moves, and they take jobs along the coastline, and various sort of ethnic minorities. Because the background to this in Sri Lanka is, of course, the civil war still very much on the go there.
Yeah.
So there's people who are already displaced, and the ethnic minorities, so presumably the Tamils, they get squeezed out as well. The government fighting the civil war in Sri Lanka see this as an opportunity to suppress people. So although there is like a story of reconstruction that is very successful, and you've looked a little bit at that, but there's this other side to it as well.
Did you hear about the civil war that kind of went the other way in
Yes,
in Indonesia?
Yeah, I did. I wrote a little bit about that because did you read the Guardian article about these two things in parallel? Right, that's really interesting, isn't it?
How the rebels declared a ceasefire, I think the day after, so on the 27th or the 28th. It might have been the 28th,
right? And
then the government followed a couple of days after that. And
so this is on the island of Aceh in Indonesia,
which was the worst
hit
place because it was the nearest place to the actual quake itself.
And so they start peace talks as early as January 2005 in Helsinki. And I think that's remarkable, isn't it, that people grasp that opportunity to make peace and come to some sort of permanent settlement. In contrast to what happened in Sri Lanka, that's a little more complicated. There's the thing where immediately afterwards in 2005 the Tamil rebels don't let the local population engage in the elections, and that lets a hardliner win. If they had voted, moderates would have won, but a hardline candidate wins. And then what happens ultimately sort of is the defeat of the Tamils in 2009, a number of years later, and that is bloody and generally awful.
Disastrous.
Oh, totally disastrous. But it totally squashes any hopes that the Tamils have of a homeland at that point. Yeah, so it's interesting to see. So this brings out the best in people and the worst in people.
Old News.
So one thing I very clearly remember in this is in the UK we have an organisation called the DEC, which is the Disasters Emergency Committee. That's right. So it's like a coordinating group of 13, I think it is 13 of the main aid organisations. I remember immediately after the incident, the DEC themselves actually did a lot of the television appeals.
Yeah.
And the advertising, and I think the main broadcasters gave them free airtime, didn't they, to air appeals, and that was the first time they did it, and it was really successful. I mean, the amount of money that the British public donated was.
Yeah, it seems to have put the government to shame. I actually couldn't find a figure for what the British government gave. Did you?
No, I didn't actually.
But there was talk about the fact that the British public gave significantly more than the British government.
There was one thing I was reading where it certainly... Oh no, it was on a documentary. It certainly helped that this happened at Christmas. Because people were at home with their families with nothing else to watch other than the TV, and they saw stories of families being torn apart and whatever, and people naturally, it's that sort of Christmas spirit as well.
Yeah.
If it was going to happen, it was the best time to happen in the UK for sort of people being in a charitable mood as such.
Yeah.
But that DEC, the committee, has gone on to. They are a bit of a regular feature of life now, aren't they? When
every time something happens,
major incidents. I think the next time I really remember them coming into play was the Haiti earthquake in 2011. I think that was.
Right.
All credit to them for an organisation that really had sort of been on the edges, and I think a lot of people. I mean, they were founded in 1963.
Really, I didn't know that. I thought it was a relatively new thing.
Innovation. I think the new innovation was the fact that they took this leading role.
Yeah,
and I think that's certainly been a force for good in the years since.
Old news.
Well, I think that about wraps up what I had to say on the incident of the earthquake and tsunami. But I think it's hard to look at what is out there in the media and the history of it and not be horrified by the things that happened and the things that people coped with. But I think if you look carefully enough about how much good was done, and that really impresses me, the amount of people that volunteered to help and did some really terrible jobs, disposing of bodies and burying and identifying victims and things, a lot of whom had no training or whatever, and they did it because, well, they had to, but because they wanted to, because they and the number of charities that have been set up since. There was a couple who lost a girl, English couple who lost their daughter in the incident. They have a charity in her name now, and they funded play facilities for children in Thailand and a children's hospital wing, amongst other things. There's another chap who lost his brother, and he has a charity in his name that sends disaster relief to children in particular around the world, and had like an educational charity as well. So I think that the classic conclusion from these incidents is always no matter how terrible things are, it always seems that some good comes.
Old news.
And of course, as usual, we've got to thank Ben Sound for the use of their royalty-free music, and Peter Kitson for the use of his voice during our little links. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.
Goodbye. So if you want to contact us, no, we're not going to start with the word so. If you want to contact us,